everyone, welcome to The First Step, a talk show about having hard conversations. Today I have with me, if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Katie Acker.
Hi, I'm Ashleigh File.
And before we get started, I have a promotional statement that I'm going to read for the VCIC, which reads, the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities is an 86-year-old organization that started in Lynchburg, Virginia as the Virginia region of the National Conference of Christian and Jews, in a grassroots efforts to address community concerns related to anti-Catholicism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Protestantism. I stutter every time. Community members took part in interfaith dialogues across Virginia. Over time, conversations grew to include other aspects of social identities like race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, class, and ability status. Today, VCIC is an independent nonprofit that works with schools, businesses, and communities to achieve success through inclusion. VCIC hosts programs year-round for students, including one-day forums like the Diversity Dialogue Day and the Prejudice Awareness Summit, and a week-long summer retreat called Connections. And if you want to find out more, you can follow them on social media, which is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and those are linked on our website, which is linked in our Instagram bio. So, before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that while Katie and Ashleigh's experiences and answers to the questions should be respected, it should also be recognized that they are only one person within the mental health community, and therefore they cannot possibly represent every single person. This conversation is just the first step. So, you guys ready? Mm-hmm. Alrighty, for the first question, it reads, how to so sorry. I'm reading it word for word. You'll see it above in the thing. It says, how to ask your parents for a therapist or something like that.
Okay.
So we get the gist.
Uh-huh.
But yes.
Well, I think for me, I was going through a hard time in middle school, and I feel like everyone goes through a hard time in middle school, but I think it was more so my parents kind of noticed a change in me and noticed that I started to have more anxiety, and I was having anxiety attacks, and I think I went to like my pediatrician or something, and then that's kind of what was the first step of that, you go see a therapist, and then I got put on medicine. But I've been with the same therapist since 6th grade, so, and it's like a really good thing. I feel like there's a big stigma on going to see a therapist and being put on medicine for anxiety, depression, whatever it is, and like I don't think that should exist, because everyone goes through things, and if you don't have the coping mechanisms, you're never gonna be better and become better. So I feel like if you want to talk to your parents, you should just sit down and have a conversation with them and kind of just be like, can you please hear me out? Like, I'm struggling. And, or if you don't want to talk to them, go talk to someone else that you trust, like an adult or a family friend or something, and then ask them to talk to your parents. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I personally, my issues with mental health escalated very quickly, and so honestly it was more just it wasn't really my choice to get a therapist. It was a lot of people basically encouraging me that it would probably be helpful. So I know that my experience would probably be a lot different from other people's, especially if they just think that they would benefit from a therapist. But I think that, like Katie said, if you think that a therapist would be helpful, and if you think that would allow you to heal or process whatever you're going through, then I think that the first step would be to name plug would be to just have a conversation with them, and explain to them what you're feeling and what's going on, and if they've noticed any changes in you, then most likely they will want to do whatever they can to support you, and if not, then there are other people who are able to help you as well, such as teachers or administrators. The school counselor is actually very, very good, and just there's plenty of people that would offer support if that's something that would be helpful for you.
Alrighty. Second question reads, what's the hardest part about being mentally ill that people who aren't might not realize?
I think that I feel like that this generation, a lot of people suffer from some sort of mental illness, and a lot of it goes undiagnosed. I'm not telling people that they have mental illness. I'm just saying that a wide majority suffer from anxiety, depression, like very generalized mental disorders and stuff like that. And I feel like that, like I said, like a lot of it goes undiagnosed, and even if you don't necessarily have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression or anything like that, that doesn't mean you still don't get anxious or you still don't have moments where you feel sad all the time or things get more difficult than others. And so I feel like that a lot of people know more about what it feels like to be lonely or to have a mental illness than they might understand. However, I know that there are varying degrees and various experiences for different people. It's different for everybody who has a mental illness or mental disorder or whatever you want to classify them as. I think that the hardest thing is probably just how difficult small tasks can be, and how tired the people who suffer from mental illness are all the time. I know that that's a big one for me, is whenever I'm in a time in my life where I'm really anxious or I'm having just a lot of mental issues. I just get really tired, I get really closed off, it's really hard to be social, it's hard to enjoy things that you generally you take pleasure out of. And I feel like that a lot of people can assume that someone is just being really distant or doesn't want to talk to them or wants to push them away, and even though that might not necessarily be the intention, then that's how it can come across. And I think that as we gain more education in different areas about mental health, then I think that people are able to respond better and give people what they need. But as far as how it's different, it's just an entirely different mindset. I don't even know how to describe it. There's so many different ways that mental health affects somebody individually, and so it takes a lot of interaction and a lot of effort from both parties to kind of find a common ground where there's a mixture of support and also just being able to be there for someone.
I completely agree with everything that you said. And also, I think for me personally, it's really hard when, I feel like the word I'm depressed is thrown around a little bit too much. It's kind of become a joke. And for someone who struggles with it, I think it's really kind of inconsiderate for people to say that when they haven't experienced something as depressive as they're throwing around the joke to be. And I think that just realizing that everyone's situation and everyone's mental health is not the same. So if you're depressed in one way, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be the same way. There's varying ways of how people are going to be in their depressive state or their anxious state that aren't going to be the same to someone else who's going through something as well. But I think I totally agree with, as people start to become more educated on the differences between people's cases, I think it'll be a lot more open and people will understand it. But I think for someone who's trying to support someone going through a tough time is to just be patient with them. And I know personally, like Ashleigh said, I distance myself sometimes whenever I'm really anxious or depressed, and that can come across as I'm being mean or I'm shutting people out, but that's really just how I'm coping. I need to take a step back and kind of figure out what's going on in my head before I can actually let people be there for me, kind of thing.
Alrighty. Question 3 reads, how did you reach out for help, or did someone reach out to you because they noticed something was off? And I think you touched on this, Katie, earlier about that whole...
Yeah, I was diagnosed with a really rare medical condition in 6th grade, and I saw 17 different doctors, and I went to UVA, Johns Hopkins, and VCU to try and get diagnosed. And that was a lot because on the weekly basis I would have 3 to 4 doctor's appointments, and it was kind of just I was being shuffled around to different doctors and constantly being told we don't know. I used dance as my outlet, and I couldn't dance or walk for 6 months. So it was just like everything that I knew, have ever known in my life that was normal and what I would do on the daily basis was completely altered in a matter of like 2 months. So that's when I think my parents made the decision that to help me better cope and to kind of work through what I was going through and not feel so isolated and alone, because I wasn't really able to go to school and socialize with my friends, and a lot of people would kind of shut me out because like a lot of people were like, you're faking. So I didn't know how to deal with that, plus I was actually like something was going on. And I think that's when my parents were like, they reached out to my pediatrician, like I said, and kind of went from there. But I think that's probably one of the best things that my parents have advocated for me, and all of my siblings. We each have our own struggles and we each are in therapy, and it's not like, it's just because we all have something different. Like one of my siblings has OCD, I have anxiety and depression, the other one has ADHD. Like it's just, that's not, like you don't go to a therapist because you're, like people don't have to go to a therapist just for one thing. Like it's not just you go to your therapist because you're depressed. Like it's a way of working through other things, and I feel that I'm very lucky that my parents saw a change in me and really advocated for me, and I appreciate that very much. So
I mean, a lot of what Katie said is somewhat relevant to me as well. I mentioned before that mostly it was other people that noticed a change in me, and I think that where my mental health started was that I was always like really insecure. I was really anxious. I wasn't confident. I just was like a very quiet and standoffish child, and I always have been. This one knows because she tried to befriend me all throughout freshman year.
I say it's 4 years. She says it's 3. I say it's 4 years of friendship.
I say it's 3 because the first year I wasn't having it. But in middle school, I developed an eating disorder in 7th grade, and it escalated very quickly. I went from being like a normal girl, I guess, in some way, shape, or form, and then I just kind of like suddenly I couldn't do a lot of things because my parents, they didn't notice at first. I was very secretive, and that's one of the main things that people don't realize about eating disorders is that they're very glamorized, and a lot of people are like, oh, like, it's like you just don't eat and that's all, but there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more mental side of it, and so I basically just like I became someone entirely different. I distanced myself from my friends. I didn't ever go out. My grades stayed the same because I would just like study myself to death, because it was something that I could do to get my mind off everything else. And so eventually my parents, they realized that it wasn't me just trying to get fit or get healthy or whatever. It was like something very serious and something a lot more, they ran a lot deeper. And so they had me go to a nutritionist and a therapist, but neither of those really helped in a way that I needed. And so I ended up going to the Eating Disorder Recovery Center in Denver, Colorado for 3 months, I believe, like towards the end of 7th grade. And it was certainly a big change for me to be in a different environment that wasn't, what I was used to. So up until that point, a lot of the support that I was getting was from other people that were kind of trying to support me, whereas I didn't want the support yet. I wasn't ready to accept it. I wasn't ready to ask for it. And so I tried to get away from it. But I reached the point, I think, where I understand that if I want to, if I don't want to live like that, like live in a state where like I don't have friends, I can't enjoy my life or anything like that, then I have to also I also have to want it, and I have to let other people help me and let people in. And that was really difficult, but it's something that I feel like I've gotten a lot better at as I've gotten older. But yeah, I think that for me it was mostly other people kind of shoving support in my face and me kind of having to learn how to accept it.
Yeah, no, I felt that. What is it? I know that for, like, personally, because it seems that both of you had people notice, I unfortunately did not have, specifically my parents, I don't think, noticed. It took a mental breakdown in front of my mom to get me into therapy. So, I don't want people to feel bad if others don't notice. And that's something, like, it's not because people don't care. It's because, I mean,
No, yeah.
you're a good liar. Like, I know.
For real, because, like, I mean, and I'm gonna take that and run for 1 second.
Like, because like I was said, like, there's a stutter. But like I said, my parents, they didn't notice up until the point where I had to be sent away. Basically, they shipped me off. I had gotten that bad, so it was like, just because other people aren't noticing it, it doesn't mean that your experiences aren't valid and your emotions aren't valid, and it doesn't mean that you aren't as bad off as somebody else because people aren't noticing. And it's not, you shouldn't compare, if you're able to, the best thing is to try not to compare yourself to other people and compare your experiences to other people, because that just, it leads to a lot more issues in just confidence and like your sense of validation and stuff like that. But I definitely think that, like, even if other people aren't noticing, that doesn't mean that you can't say something to them, and that if you have to say something to them and they don't say something to you, then that doesn't mean that you are any different, or at least that it doesn't mean that your experiences aren't just as valid as someone else's, and that not everything looks the same for everybody, especially when it comes to something as complex as mental health.
Yeah. But to say just because someone else doesn't notice doesn't mean it's not there. Where was it? Sad line! Okay, so the next question reads, is mental health just biology, like chemicals, or can people actually become mentally ill because of stuff that, like, happens to them?
I think it's a mixture of both. I know, I don't know, like, in my blood family, like my parents and my grandparents, but I know, like, my cousins, one of them had depression, and then, you know, now the kids have depression, so I've seen that in my own family, but also it can totally be situational. Like, this past year I lost my dance teacher, and that turned into, like, I've always struggled with depression, but that was a different type, because grief is so different than, like, just struggling in general with trying to live your life, basically. So I think it's a mixture of both, and it, like, just because one, like, you're biologically diagnosed or whatever, like the chemicals in your brain, doesn't mean that, like, you're worse off or you're, you know, like, completely different than someone who gets it because of a situation. Like, those are both valid reasons to have mental health issues, and one isn't, like, superior than the other, because they're both valid.
I would have to agree with that. I also think that it's kind of a mixture of both, or it can just be, it can be one for one person and one for another. I don't think that there's one set answer to this question, but I know that for me personally, it was both situational, and also just, like, I think it was somewhat genetic. My mom also has anxiety, and I truly think she has depression. She has not been diagnosed with depression.
I mispile.
Yeah. And so,
She always says that I was doomed from the start, but I don't. Yeah, that's what she says. But I don't think that's necessarily accurate in all instances. I think that, like I said, in some cases it just depends on what you're around and like how it is, because especially if, like, for example, if your parents have struggled with anxiety or anger issues or depression, then you being around that and having that mindset and that negative environment, that has an impact. And just because it's not your struggle, it doesn't mean that it can't become your struggle. I know that when other people around me sorry, I wasn't gonna say I'm an empath.
Me and empath noticing that you might be upset.
Yeah. But no, because my mom always says she's an empath, and I'm like,
TikTok really ruined that.
It really did, because I also used to say that, and now I'm like, I literally cringe every time I say that I'm empath. But it's like,
when other people are struggling around me, then like I feel for them on a personal level, and I feel like that can, I'm not saying that necessarily leads to mental health issues, but it can lead to your awareness of your own mental health issues, and it's kind of like, I feel like that in like there are some instances where it would be very difficult for someone not to struggle in some way, shape, or form with a mental illness. Like I know that my cousin, he was diagnosed with multiple different genetic disorders, and his lifespan was literally he was cut off at 20, and they were like, you're gonna die before 20. So he developed anxiety and depression. I'm not saying obviously, because that's not necessarily always the case, but for his case, he did develop some mental health issues because of that, and understandably because of all of the negativity that was in his life, and because of all these bad omens, I guess you could even say, just almost like prophesizing. And I just feel like that it can go either way, and either one, and like Katie said, is just as valid as the other.
The next question we have is something like depression or anxiety something you think you can be cured of, and cured is put in quotation marks, or is mental health something that just stays forever?
I don't really believe in the whole idea that you can be really cured of it, because it's something that you are going to feel the effects of for probably like the rest of your life, and those effects will kind of waver. I think the better answer to that is that you just learn how to cope, or start learning how to cope, because I know from experience that a lot of the time, like, you don't really want to cope. You just want to sit and wallow in your funk that you're in, and like then you get so far deep into the funk that you don't know how to get out, and then when you start trying to cope, like, it doesn't really work. So I think it's more so learning how to deal with what you're going through, and deal with the little kind of peaks or downfalls of anxiety and depression or your mental health issues. It's not gonna be like linear, and it's not gonna be the same for everyone, but it's kind of just like, I might be having a good day, but Ashleigh might be having a rough day, or vice versa, and it's just, I don't really think, in my opinion, that you're ever really gonna be cured, because it's gonna be with you forever, because it's impacted you so much.
I would have to agree. I personally don't really believe that you can necessarily be cured of a mental illness. I think that assuming that taking a medication or being diagnosed is going to cure you is kind of a toxic mindset, just because I think that it can really affect how, like, a lot of people's self-esteem and their, I don't know, like, I just feel like that in some cases, if you tell somebody that if they start going to therapy and they start taking medication and they start thinking positively all the time, or they try to have a more optimistic outlook on life, that's going to completely erase everything like all of the anxiety, all of the depression that you suffered up until that point, and I just don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that a person is always going to have ups and downs. They're going to have good days and bad days, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with having a wonderful day and then start crying the next morning for no reason. It's just, I feel like that in some cases, like the medication can help, and having added support such as therapy or having your friends know or your family know about your struggles, I feel like that can help, and it can help you to manage it and maybe not go into a depressive episode for as long or not have as much anxiety. But I think it's always going to be there, and if you neglect it and don't manage that anxiety, and you don't kind of take responsibility for the fact that you do have a mental illness and it's something that kind of needs to be nurtured, then I think that it's never truly going to go away or even get better in some instances. I mean, I've heard multiple people say that a mental illness is really not that much. It's not that much different than like a long-term physical illness, such as like diabetes. I've had compared multiple times, and while that's not necessarily the best comparison, and there's a lot of holes in that, I feel like the meaning is there, and that it does make sense that that mental health, you can't really get rid of it, but you can ease the effects of it, and you can have the support that'll help you to have the strength to get through it.
And then I have our final question, which reads, what is the best way that someone who is not mentally ill can show support and solidarity with you?
I think being patient and really being aware, like we both said, we shut people out sometimes, and just kind of for people who are trying to support those with mental illnesses to just kind of take a step back for a second and know that it's not really intentional, that it's just our way of coping or a particular person's way of coping, and just really like listen, and not really be like quick to judge or respond, just kind of just take a step back, listen, absorb it, and then go to the person with how you want to support them. Because sometimes, like I know personally, I'm not ready for that support. Like I need a little bit to kind of deal with my own stuff before I let you come in and start trying to like smother me with your love and attention. But like that's sometimes too much. So I think patience and understanding is what I would say.
Yeah, actually the first thing that came to mind was patience, because like I said, we kind of have a little bit of a similarity there. I also think that it's important for someone who is trying to support someone with a mental illness to also take time for themselves. I know that might sound kind of strange, but I think that the biggest mistake that someone can make is to focus all of your energy on someone else and not focus on yourself. Because like I said, I've been told multiple times that you can't help others if you don't help yourself at the same time. And if you don't pay attention to how you're feeling, or if something is difficult for you to hear, then you can think about why, instead of just trying to push your own issues away and focus on someone else. Because while I'm sure that the support is appreciated and all of that, I think that that in order to give the proper support, you kind of have to help them through it, but also have that time to kind of just like stay separated from it in some cases. And I know that can be very difficult. But yeah, I just think that being there for them and letting it be. We can stop.
No, that's okay. You can finish your.
I was going to say that I'd like to let a person know that they have the support whenever they feel comfortable and ready to accept it, is probably a very important thing, but not necessarily forcing it on somebody else.
Well, thank you guys for coming on and answering. We are cutting it a little close. We do have classes to get to. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and remember to be kind to each other.